welcome. Just to get going, let me confirm. Josh, can you see my opening screen right here?
I can, yes.
Okay, great. So we have a pretty packed participants list. We have 68 folks on the line right now. My name is Galen Mook. I'm the Executive Director of MassBike. I am very encouraged to welcome Josh Zisson from Bike Safe Boston here to join us. Josh has been a good friend of the bike advocacy world since, when did you start your practice, Josh?
2011.
2011. Yeah, and I remember Josh from Cannoli Fridays at Hub Bicycle.
Man, yeah.
More going on. Before we get jumping in, I know I miss those too. Good job, Emily. We're going to run through a little bit of webinar tips, kind of some ground rules, some housekeeping. Everybody who's on the list, you are on mute, so 68 of you cannot speak verbally, but we do encourage you to use the Q&A and the chat feature. The Q&A comes to me, the chat feature goes to everybody. We are recording this to share afterwards. We got a couple questions of how we're going to be able to share, so it's going to be no problem. Walter will hopefully have a YouTube link that you can put on the Facebook page. And I think we got folks from all over. We got folks in the Cape, we got folks from Western Mass, we got folks from the North Shore, from Boston, from the South Coast and all. So I'm really encouraged that we're able to bring kind of a statewide conversation. Most bike laws are state laws. So this does impact, most of what we're talking about today is going to impact you regardless of where you are in Massachusetts. Of course, everything is local. So there'll be a little bit of local, tips and tricks on how to deal with your local police department, district attorneys and all that. But this is all pertinent to everybody who is chiming in if you're in Massachusetts. So feel free to share it around. We're going to have links to be shared. I'll probably put that in an email to send your way after the video goes up online. And you can, thanks, Erica. You can follow along with MassBike on our social media, and I'll tell you some upcoming events at the end of this webinar. But we've got one on Thursday on the ABCs of bike maintenance, one next week on bike packing the Bay Circuit Trail, and the following week about national advocacy. I'm going to warn you that this is a first in our webinar series for us, so there may be hiccups. If you can't hear me, or if for some reason the internet goes down, or for something else, you can feel free to email us at bikeinfo@massbike.org. I'll also be screening the chat, and so feel free to get in touch with us. My apologies in advance if there are any hiccups. And what we're going to be talking about today, once I introduce Josh, let me see if I can get this to fit the screen.
I don't know my notes.
Yeah, I know. I just took it. Hopefully it's okay. We're going to talk about negligence. Yeah, we're going to talk about what the laws are. We're going to talk about how laws are and aren't enacted, which might actually be more of MassBike's role to explain. We're going to talk about what happens when you're in a crash, which is very important that there's kind of a step-by-step process. And probably one of the takeaways from today is what to do in a crash. And we'll talk about insurance, and we'll open it up for some Q&A. So feel free to stick around. I'm going to open it up to Josh. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'll let Josh take it away, and I'll be kind of running some back-end stuff, so I apologize if I pop around a little bit. But here's attorney Josh Zisson for you. 9 years ago, he started a law practice dedicated to serving the needs of the bike community. He's got a blog and a Facebook and a Twitter presence called Bike Safe Boston, and which aims to educate cyclists on their rights and responsibilities under the law, and hopefully prevent crashes from occurring. I asked what his dreams were, and Josh's dream is to put himself out of business. And
that is the goal.
All of us advocates should be so lucky. And again, if you have any questions out there, folks, please, the chat is open and the Q&A is open. But Josh, I'll ask you to kind of jump in and take it away.
Great, thanks, Galen. First of all, I want to just say this is weird. I don't know how to do this. So my girlfriend is also working from home here, so I am party to a lot of Zoom conversations. This is my first time using it though myself. So yeah, that I just wanted to maybe point that out. I don't know. It just feels weird. But anyway, I'm really happy to be here. I'm happy to see so many people are out there listening, even though I can't see them. So I guess I thought we'd start with the concept of negligence, and more importantly, negligence per se, which is a legal doctrine that you don't really need to know about in too much detail. But basically, after a crash occurs, someone gets hit by a car, the idea is that it's all about determining who was at fault, because that determines who pays for your bike, who pays for your broken leg, and whatever other damages you suffered as a result of the driver's negligence, usually. And so in order to determine who's at fault, the doctrine of negligence per se says that you can get the answer to that question, or the answer to that question can be dictated by whether a statute or regulation was being broken. If someone was in violation of a law at the time of the crash. And so, an act, so basically what that means is if someone was, if someone runs a red light and hits you, they're presumed negligent. And so that's basically what it comes down to, just to take it into the real world. So that's why knowing what the laws are is really important when it comes to making sure that if you are in a crash, that it wasn't your fault. And I guess that sort of also passes through and presumably would prevent crashes from occurring if people know the laws and know to obey them. And so basically, as an example, if you're riding down the road and an oncoming driver turns left into your path, cutting you off, and you fall and you break your wrist, and the question is who is responsible? Well, in Massachusetts, we have a law, and many other states have this. Ours is particularly well written, well constructed, but it's General Law, Chapter 90, Section 14, that basically says that vehicles must yield to oncoming traffic when making left turns. And so in this case, you were going straight, the driver made a left turn, and the driver had a duty to yield, and they didn't. So under negligence per se, we can just say, the driver was at fault because they were in violation of that law. And I cite this example because this is one of the types of crashes, we call it a left cross, that is often misunderstood, I would say, by drivers, by police at the scene. I mean, I've had plenty of scenarios where someone was hit like this, and this type of crash can happen in two ways. One where the driver turning left actually hits you with the front of their car, and the other where they cut you off and maybe you run into the side of their car, the back of their car. And in the latter case, it seems a lot murkier to a lot of people. And so I've had police officers write in the report, well, the cyclist ran into the side of the car. And it's like, well, not on purpose. They were, you had the right of way. You were going straight, and they cut you off. And so, that's where where negligence per se comes in. And without the doctrine of negligence per se, you could still show that the driver was negligent, but it makes it a lot easier. You get to skip a few steps when there's a law that says, this is something you shouldn't be doing. This is something we want to protect against. And so, but the one thing to remember about negligence per se, one thing to know about it, is that it cuts both ways. So, for instance, if you're riding at night and you don't have a rear light on your bike and you get hit from behind, well, it can be inferred, it can be presumed that it was your fault. And so even if the driver was, maybe not paying attention at the time, it's a much harder thing to come back from when we're trying to say that, they should have seen you with their headlights alone. But, well, there's a law in Massachusetts that says that when you're riding at night, you need a rear light or a rear reflector. And if you don't have that, well, then that's a problem. And so just to briefly touch on the four main laws that I deal with in helping cyclists after a crash. We have Chapter 90, Section 1B relates mostly to motorized bicycles. It's not really. I just have these main four laws that sort of relate to bikes and traffic. But 90, Section 1B is part of the definition of a bicycle. Sort of. They're sort of sub definitions, but not as important as the next one, which is Chapter 90, Section 14. And this one encompasses a number of different practices. It's sort of different types of crashes are sort of directly described and prohibited, which is great. Oh, perfect. So first among them is dooring. You can't open your door into the path of a cyclist or other traffic without looking. Then you have the left cross, as I described, the right hook, which is when driver passes a cyclist and then immediately takes a right turn after overtaking them. It also details safe passage or safe passing. It must be done if you're approaching a person on a bicycle. Motor vehicle operator has to slow down and pass at a safe distance and a reasonable and proper speed. Other states have laws where they specifically, 3 feet. They specifically say that passing has to be done, leaving 3 feet of distance between a car and a cyclist. I personally, while that sounds great, but I don't think that there's anything specifically wrong with our law saying it has to be a reasonable distance and a reasonable speed. But either, just because it doesn't really, no one's getting out there with a ruler to pull these people over. These laws really don't come into play until there's been a crash. So really, it's about showing civil liability. It also, see, 90 Section 14 also, it says, school bus stop signs. I actually, it wasn't until someone wrote into my website with a question about whether bikes have to stop for the stop signs on the side of school buses that I realized that this was part of this law. I think I just sort of skimmed by it. But it turns out, no, it's not. I was a little bit surprised to see that. Cyclists are not required to stop for school buses. Still a good idea. I still urge people to do it. But it only applies to motor vehicles. Then we have Chapter 85, Section 11B, basically establishes cyclists' right to the road, which is a really good one. I particularly like that, and we can sort of come back to that. But it also says that lights are required at night, basically a half hour after sunset to a half hour before sunrise. You need a white headlight and a red tail light or red reflector on the back. And there's a bunch of other stuff in here, mandating helmets for people under 16, cyclists under 16, saying you can't carry packages on your handlebars. It's sort of exhaustive and in this little minutia. You have to have certain types of brakes and all that. But the important stuff is lights, and that bicycles have a right to the roads in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So why that's important. Oh, and then there's also Chapter 89, Section 2, which basically says if there isn't room to pass a cyclist safely, then drivers must wait until it is safe to do so. So, it's not okay to sort of squeeze by someone riding a bike on a road just because you're in a car. But going back to the right to the road, I think that's something that people don't realize how important that is, because it's not just about the laws that we have in Massachusetts, and we have some really good laws thanks to Mass Bike and Mass Bike's efforts. Basically, all the laws that we've just been talking about were enacted in 2009 due to the efforts of the lobbying efforts of Mass Bike to overhaul the bike laws for the state, and they did a really great job. I mean, I've read the bike laws for pretty much every other state in the country, and none of them are as comprehensive and, frankly, as helpful to cyclists as Massachusetts, and something I'm really proud of, something that Mass Bike should be extremely proud of. But it's not just the laws that we have; it's the laws that we don't have. And in other states, and even in states with very good bike laws, there are laws such as one what's known as mandatory side path. And the idea behind mandatory side path is that if there is a bike lane, then a cyclist must operate in that bike lane if they're riding on that road. And there are a list of exceptions to that, such as if you're about to take a left turn, if the bike lane is obstructed, there are these enumerated exceptions. And the problem with mandatory side path is that if you get hit, and let's say you were not in the bike lane when you got hit, you already start sort of downhill. You have to justify your position in the road when a car hit you in order to prove that you weren't at fault. Because as we covered with the idea of the doctrine of negligence per se, well, you were in violation of that law unless you fit into these narrow categories where it's, well, there was an obstruction. Okay, there was a car parked in the bike lane. I couldn't be in it. And then it's on the burden of proof is on you to show that there was a car there. Unless you have video of it, the driver certainly doesn't remember there being a car there. They didn't see you. They're not going to see a car that was parked there. So, you're already starting off at a disadvantage, and it's something that seems rather innocuous, but really, I've helped out people in other states, and this has been a real issue. And in the same vein, there's also laws in many states that say that cyclists must keep right. If they're traveling, if they're going to have the audacity to travel on the roads of this state, they need to stay as far to the right as practicably possible. So, you can see that there's sort of the same issue as with mandatory side path. Well, what were you doing so far from the right? Why weren't you riding in the gutter like you should be? You trash. But I'm only kidding about that.
I do want to jump in for a sec, Josh, that the laws are great, but then they're also how they're implemented and enforced, or
Sure.
how they're written up in an investigation. So
Yeah.
the laws there does not prevent a biased reporter or investigator from
Absolutely.
requiring justification for why that person was riding a bike in the street in the first place.
Right. Yeah. And I think that I have my own way of looking at these laws, because when we talk about the law, when I say that the laws are really good in Massachusetts, I'm saying that from the perspective of an attorney who represents cyclists. So they're really good for me and for my clients, because they're very useful. But when it comes to sort of the other side of things, where you're just a cyclist out there and the laws are not being enforced for drivers, the laws are, there aren't more proactive, I guess, types of laws where cops are actually pulling people over for driving or parking in the bike lane. We don't have a robust number of laws to deal with stuff like that. And that's an area where there's definitely needs to be some improvement. So when I say the laws are great, I'm saying that in my role as an attorney.
Yeah, and I'll speak a little bit while we transition to the next topic, but how laws are crafted. I'll go back to my sharing screen here. I hope everybody can see that. From the massbike.org site, you can go to our resources page and you can see, Zoom is not letting me get to it, but you'll see a few resources there. Oops. What to do when you crash and the bike laws. Now I'm jumping all over, my apologies. Most of these laws have been around, mostly since mass bike has been fighting since the 70s. We got a bicycle bill through in 2009 when David Watson was running mass bike, and that took probably the better part of a decade, which had some really important aspects to it that were bike specific, such as you could ride two abreast. The fine or the citation of at fault for when a door is opened on a person is at whomever opens the door. Little things like that really kind of nuanced our rights for riding in the streets. And all of these laws basically take, a decade or longer sometimes to get through the State House if they're going to be working on their own. It's a challenging endeavor to try to pass laws. We did get one through in November, which was the hands-free cell phone use when driving off. So the idea of you have to have a device in hands-free mode was not actually Massachusetts law. You weren't allowed to text, but it was really hard to identify what a text was versus what it was to look at a map or whatever else a person might be doing with their handheld phone. So the police were not able to really enforce, even though we had a ban on texting for about a decade. So we were actually able to get through. It took, I would say, a better part of 15 years to actually get the hands-free law passed. And we were one of the last states, definitely in New England, but mostly in the whole country, to say can't have your hand in your phone. But it does take a monumental effort to get it through the bicameral support of the State House and then get it to the governor's desk to be signed. Just to let you know, we have some laws that are on the in process right now. One is the 3-foot passing law. Right now it says you need to pass a cyclist at a quote safe passing distance, which is, Josh mentioned, is undefined. So we're trying to get that out there to say 3 feet at 30 miles an hour and then an additional foot at every 10 mile an hour increase. Some other things, we're trying to get standard crash reporting for bicyclists and pedestrians, because you can imagine right now that there are 351 municipalities in the state, which means there's 351 ways that these reports are being taken. And we can't make good, we can't make good laws or have good analysis if we don't have good data. And a few others that are happening there too. So keep in touch with MassBike as the efforts go forward. I appreciate everybody paying attention and talking to your local legislators. It really does take a groundswell of support that comes from the local level to the local legislators to make its way up to the committee chairs to then get actually out. I will say right now the State House is pretty stalled. They're even trying to figure out the rules of how to vote remotely during COVID. So we're not hopeful of trying to attach a bicycle safety bill to a COVID or stimulus response. I think that's not appropriate at the moment. We want these to be carried on their own. But we do encourage you to keep in touch with MassBike and just stay up with your legislators too to find out what's going on in the State House. Cool. And Josh, I wonder if we could pivot to a quick poll question.
Oh yeah, sure.
If you don't mind. All right, so I'm going to ask a poll. We'll take about 30 seconds to let it go. And realizing that we're a little about halfway through the webinar right now. Do want to leave ample time for Q&A. So I don't know, Josh, if you're able to see the questions here. We've gotten about 8 or 9 questions so far, which is great. If your questions don't get answered, if questions don't get answered here, don't worry. Cool. I'm going to end the poll. Looks like we have 71% of the 81 voted. I'll give it a few more seconds. Have you ever been involved in a crash?
Can I answer one of these questions or some of these questions?
Yeah, by all means, go for it.
Do I just click answer live?
Yeah, or speak it live, maybe.
Let's see what that is. Yeah. So Wade DePere, on a left cross, what if the cyclist does not make contact with the car? Cyclist attempts to avoid the collision, but is injured in his attempt to avoid the impact. That is a very good question. And actually, I think I had an example of that coming up. But yeah, it's like, you slam on your brakes, you go over your handlebars. Your attempts to avoid a collision with the car are rewarded with a cop trying to tell you that, you know, well, contact didn't occur, so, you know, this is your fault. Like, well, no, someone cut me off, and I was successful in my attempt to avoid them, and yet I was still injured. And I've had a number of cases like that, and was able to successfully argue that the driver was still at fault. It almost shouldn't be that difficult, but you know, yeah. I mean, it seems sort of obvious, but yes, the answer is, you know, in the cases that I've dealt with, the driver is still at fault, even though contact is not made.
Cool. Thanks, Josh. Can you see the responses to this poll right here?
Oh, I don't see any poll responses.
I guess I'm trying to share a response. So it looks like I've been involved in a crash. We have 55% have and 45% have not. So this is actually a really good question, I believe, because those of you who have been in a crash, maybe we don't have time now, but if you want to put into the chat any concerns that have come up in that crash report, or did you go and get the report, is a question that I like to ask. Did you actually go to the police department at least 24 hours later and get a copy of that report? Was insurance involved? Was the legal process involved? So it's sticky, it's tricky, which is why folks like Josh and other bike lawyers around are there to help you out. Cool. Josh, can we jump into what happens when you are in a crash?
Yeah, sure. So I wrote about this a number of years ago because I kept seeing, you know, people posting links to these websites where, you know, either an attorney or some other bicycling expert tries to tell you what to do after you get hit by a car and what you need to know. And that's a really important thing. But I kept seeing these things, and it's like the 14 things you need to remember if you're ever hit by a car while riding your bike. It's like, cool. I might be able to remember 3. Like 14 things is not gonna, I mean, you just got your bell rung. You're not gonna be able to remember half of that. And if you remember the wrong parts of it, you know, it's not gonna do you very much good. So I came up with, I tried to pare it down as much as I could, and I came up with the 2 most important things that you need to remember if you're ever hit by a car. Okay. And this is in order of importance. Okay. So the number one thing, even if you can't remember the second one, the number one thing to remember is to get the driver's information. And when it comes to what information you need to get, the number one most important thing is their license plate. So getting a picture of the driver's license plate is fairly easy, even if they're an asshole and they're yelling at you for denting their car. You don't have to talk to them. You can take a picture of their license plate, and then you're good. You know, it's always good to get as much information as you can, if you can, but the bare minimum that you need to get is the driver's license plate. Now, number 2, not as important as the driver's license plate, is witnesses. We sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, that, you know, it's about proving what happened, and that can be, you know, the color of a light when you pass through an intersection. And, you know, when it's your word against the driver's, you can't get very far. It's a stalemate, you know. But an independent witness, someone who runs over and says, I saw the whole thing as you're getting put into an ambulance, well, you know, you have to do what you can to get their contact information. If you're nice about it, you know, people will come up to you after a crash. And I have clients all the time, you know, when I ask, well, were there any witnesses? They say, oh yeah, there's a whole bunch of people who came up to me. It's like, great, do you have any of their phone numbers or email addresses? And no, it was, they left after they helped me up. They helped pick up all my stuff. And you know, it's hard because, you know, when someone's doing that, they're already doing a good deed. And it's like you're asking them to do something more than that, you know. And but really, just if you can, try and ask for their phone number, or their their contact information. Now, I also added at the end of so this article is on my website, but I added at the end two other points concerning the police. So one question I deal with a lot, or one situation, is when someone gets hit by a car, but they don't think they're hurt enough to justify a call to 911 or a call to the police. And my answer is, if you made contact with the car in any way, in traffic, you're hurt enough. That's a good threshold. But if you're injured in, like the situation I just described, where you went over the handlebars or something like that, but didn't make contact with the car, that also counts. But just, you can, it's their job to come and deal with traffic crashes. So don't worry about contacting the police. Oh God, I would have, Galen, if I had known that you were going to put my notes.
I'm sorry.
I'm
sorry, Josh.
It's all right. So the other thing is, when the cops do arrive, you don't have to worry about number one. They're going to get the driver's information as long as the driver's still there.
Okay.
But they're not always. They don't always do such a good job of number two, which is getting witness information. I've had plenty of police reports that don't mention that there was a witness, and we only have that witness's information because they were, nice enough to give it directly to the injured cyclist, and that makes, that can make all the difference. So basically, that's what we got. And an additional thing when it comes to getting in an ambulance, this is sort of secondary after you remember the two main things you have to remember after a crash. A lot of people, you got adrenaline going pretty good, and you don't feel like you're hurt that badly, and you're just sort of, again, you just got your bell rung, and you just want to get to work or wherever you're going. And they say, do you need an ambulance? And so many people say no and have serious injuries, and they should just get in the ambulance. But there's another concern that people have, which is, well, who's going to pay for this? How am I going to pay for an ambulance ride? Because ambulance ride costs, $1,200 or more, depending on where you're taken. And so you don't want to be left on the hook for that. And I totally get it. But in Massachusetts, we have something called PIP, that stands for Personal Injury Protection. It's a law that says that any privately owned vehicles registered in Massachusetts have to have this mandatory no-fault insurance coverage, which provides for $8,000 of coverage for medical bills and lost wages after a crash. So there's $8,000 available in every mass driver's insurance policy that covers medical bills if you're injured and potentially lost wages if you.
But that's only, sorry to interrupt, but that's only if the driver is found at fault, though, I would imagine.
That is not, no. And that's the great thing about PIP. It's no fault coverage. So even if you were 100% at fault, they still have to pay for your medical treatment from PIP. And so it's really nice. And the idea is that it's sort of a safety net so that, medical bills aren't piling up as you argue with the insurance company about who caused the crash. And it just sort of streamlines the whole process. And the bottom line is, if you're sitting there on the pavement and they offer to take you to a hospital, if you see that the driver has Massachusetts license plates, you say yes, knowing that their insurance will pay for it. Will pay for the ambulance ride and the X-rays and whatever it is. So that is an important thing to keep in mind. Yeah, Galen, did you have something?
I was going to launch our next poll, actually, before we jump into the insurance
go for it.
and car questions.
Yeah,
okay.
Perfect.
Excellent. Cool. This is good. I appreciate that we're doing this in real time. So here's a new poll that should be popping up on your screen right now. The question is, do you have a car, which would imply that you had car insurance? And this is back to the PIP insurance question that Josh was just talking about. And we'll let this up for a few. And Josh, feel free to jump into one of the Q&As if you want. Maybe I'll bring up one from Kristen from Connecticut River Valley. Asks if there's debris in the side path that forces bikers to use the lane. I guess maybe that was referring to the mandatory side path conversation.
Yeah.
Or perhaps that's just generally.
And that's usually a part of the mandatory side path statute. They even often mention debris. So if there's debris or an obstruction, which can be a car, which can be, trash or, carpet tacks or whatever it is that would keep you out of the road, then that is, enough to justify being outside of the bike lane. Let's see.
Cool. We've got 85% voted. I'm just going to keep this up for 2 more seconds.
Okay. Jay-Z asks, can you filter through stopped traffic to get to the bike box when the traffic light is red? Interesting question. I would say the answer is yes. Carefully, obviously opening doors and whatnot, but filtering through traffic is something that's, I think, kind of misunderstood, because drivers seem to hate it. Cops don't really get it or don't really like it, but in Massachusetts, it is legal. What would make it illegal would be that it is passing on the right, and that is, a restriction that's put on drivers. And it's something that has been used to, there was a cyclist killed in New York City a few years ago, and they said that he was at fault because he was passing on the right. In Massachusetts, under
it's part of the bike bill. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Part of the bike bill in 2009, we were actually able to stipulate that cyclists were allowed to pass on the right. So just
unlike cars.
So,
yeah, it's an extra right that we have. So and I apply that to filtering through stop traffic, and also it's more efficient. And what are we doing here, people? Come on, we should be listening to this. So why don't we go into underinsurance?
Yeah, let's do 5 minutes there, Josh, if we could, and then we'll go into some Q&As. I think that's where a lot of the meat of this is. So just to say 90% of the folks who are listening, which is, we're up to 85 participants right now. So I really appreciate the numbers today. But 90% own a car, which assumes that they have that PIP insurance.
Not only do they have PIP, but they have the potential for underinsurance, which is one of my favorite topics. That is very boring to everybody else. But
actually, before we jump in, I want to stipulate.
Sure.
Just Herb asked, and I want to make sure that, can you have car insurance in Mass without a car, or are there other sources of liability insurance that you might want to have?
It's tricky. I haven't found a auto insurance company that will write a policy without a car. It's almost like they're confused. I remember I went through this a number of years ago for a client, and we could not. I called every insurance company, and they didn't really get what I was talking about, and they wouldn't write the policy. But underinsurance refers to 2 types of insurance coverage that you have with an auto insurance policy, and it is a great reason to keep your car. And you also, I think, after we talk about this, you'll want to look up how much coverage you have if you do have a car. But basically, there are 2 types: underinsured motorist coverage and uninsured motorist coverage. So a lot of people don't realize that your auto insurance can kick in even if you're not driving. So if you're riding your bike, for instance, which is a lot of you do. And so underinsured motorist coverage means that if you're injured by another driver and they don't have sufficient insurance to cover your injuries. So in Massachusetts, the minimum amount of insurance that you can have is $20,000 worth of injury coverage, which is one of the lowest, if not the lowest in the country, which is not great. And one thing to know about that is you can guarantee that not only do the majority of drivers on the road carry the minimum coverage, only $20,000, but 100% of cabs carry the minimum amount of coverage because they don't give a shit and whatever's cheapest. So underinsured motorist coverage, though, if you're injured by someone who has a shitty policy, your insurance company steps in and acts as their insurance, basically acts as their insurance once you've exceeded the amount available from the driver's insurance. So it's basically like giving everybody else on the road good insurance coverage. And I just have an example that stuck out in my mind when I was writing this up. A client of mine was riding down School Street in Somerville and going down that hill, and all of a sudden he was in the bike lane, a car turned right into his path to without a blinker, without looking to see if anyone was coming. And he slammed on his brakes to avoid a collision, was successful in avoiding making contact with the car, went over his handlebars and was knocked unconscious. Okay. And I later found out that there was no police report written because at the time, the Somerville Police Department did not write, because the officers who responded had determined that because he didn't make contact, that there was no incident, or that it didn't warrant a report, or they basically got out of writing up some paperwork. They don't do that anymore, which is good, but it's ridiculous. So we had a witness who thankfully took down the driver's license plate. But it turned out his skull was fractured in 6 different places.
Oh no.
And yeah, thankfully he didn't have a traumatic brain injury, and he mostly was just pretty much better. Wow. He got incredibly lucky. But, we find out, we get in touch with the driver's insurance company, and the coverage is $20,000, the least you can get. And he had just gotten rid of his car because he wanted to live that wonderful Somerville Cambridge lifestyle where you don't have to drive a car anywhere, you can ride your bike everywhere. And it's just a shame because we could have gotten him better compensation, but people don't think about this. So that's underinsured motorist coverage. The second type, uninsured motorist coverage, as you can imagine, it's your insurance company provides coverage if you're injured by, or if you're hit by someone who doesn't have auto insurance. And in this part of the country, that is actually really rare. Not too many people on the road don't have insurance. However, what makes uninsured motorist coverage really valuable is that for the purposes of underinsured motorist coverage, a hit and run driver, if a driver takes off, is considered uninsured. So basically, if you're hit by someone or doored by someone and they leave the scene, or you can't get their information, or the cop tells them to go, and doesn't take down their information, your insurance can step in as if it were their insurance, and you can be compensated that way. And so it's basically hit and run insurance, which is really, really good to have. And both of these, both types of underinsurance, I think let's see, underinsured motorist coverage is a little bit more expensive, but it's like, I think mine is for $250,000 in coverage, which is plenty, which I hope I never need. It's like $90 a year added to my, over the course of the year, added to my auto insurance. So it's incredibly cheap, and for what you get. I mean, it's always a shame when I ask this question to someone after finding out that the driver has a bad policy, has no coverage, and I say, well, do you have a car? Oh no, I just got rid of it, or I don't really have a car, or I have a car, and then I find out that they didn't, that their underinsurance coverage is low or that non-existent. So it's something. It seems really boring, but it's a really cheap way to potentially make a huge difference if you do get hit.
Yeah. Cool. So a lot of what we talked about today is basically how to cover your ass, and a lot of that is insurance conversations. To understand what the laws are is the first step to know what your responsibilities are out there. So one of the questions we have here, Josh, is for reflectors along with lights. Do reflectors count as visibility at night, specifically on clothes? Is that being taken into consideration by investigators when looking at it? And as I understand the law, it's you need a white front light, you need a rear light or reflector. Although there's some talk about, it's got to be red, right? And there's talk now about changing that to a reflector and a light, which mass bike is on the fence about. We appreciate that rear lights are safer, but we also don't want the liability or the benefit or the burden of proving it to be on the victim. But irregardless, the red rear reflector or light, white front light, and it's a side reflector. I believe it's either got to be on the pedals or the wheels.
Yeah, on the wheels or something.
Yeah, can it be on the clothing?
Yeah, I think it can. And, I think that it's not really, while these other, pedal reflectors and stuff are required by law, if you're riding after dark, it's something that I've never seen really come up. The more of the focus is on headlight, tail light, or headlight and rear reflector. And so while it technically is required by law, I'm not saying you shouldn't have them, but I've never seen a situation where an insurance company comes back to me and says, well, he didn't have pedal reflectors. I mean, I know he had a headlight on, and I know he had a tail light, but no pedal reflectors. So I think that the more reflectors, the better. But as long as you have those basic, front light, rear reflector, and rear light, you should be covered. But just briefly, I wrote about this on my website. My thoughts on rear light plus rear reflector and why it's important. So if you guys want to check that out, it should be on there somewhere. We'll also share the link. I wrote.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I use that too. So we've been going back and forth with, there's a bike bill currently making its way through that actually got unanimous support in the Senate. It's stalled in the House right now, but it would actually stipulate a rear light as well as a rear reflector. Mass Bike came out actually in opposition of the light, not because we don't think that rear lights are safer, and we actually encourage everybody to have rear lights. And actually, if you've heard of our Lights Brigade, we'll actually give you a free light if you don't have one, just to make you safe and legal out there. But it's the burden of the proof is on the victim, and it's also, we're not going to get to it because we don't have time, Josh, but you actually shared with me, and maybe I'll share with everybody after the fact, but there's a police report that you shared, which shows, let's call it dismissive police work about the victims who had a light, but they weren't actually claimed in the police report. So it's just another point for that goes against the victims out there.
And I had to go to Watertown and search the gutter for fragments of this guy's light to prove that he had one.
I'll share that actually, because there's some good images, and it'll just be 2 seconds up on the screen for everybody. I realize we're running short on time, but I want to launch my one last poll, which asks about riding with a GoPro and a camera. So I'm curious as to the facts of who out there is utilizing modern technology to document your rides in case there are incidents. And then while we're doing that, I'll share the screen. I think I can get it up of, can I multitask is the question. And this is just an example of why it's important to have a lawyer looking out for you.
Yeah.
So
it's a classic left cross, and as you can see in the report, the officer didn't make any note of, actually did make note that my client was wearing all black clothing, helmet, and gloves, and his bicycle was a dark purple and black. Like, oh, cool.
Sounds a little victim blaming to me, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So
seriously.
Josh went to the crash scene and recovered lights because he noticed that the bicycle.
Pieces.
Yeah. He noticed that the bicycle.
Oh yeah, my
had
client
mount.
told me he had them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is after the insurance company denied the claim. Also, they said, it was you can see it in the police report, it was your client's fault because he was riding at night without lights. And that's it's hard to disagree with that, except for the fact that he did in fact have lights. And so it was on us to prove that.
So it's unfortunately the onus sometimes is on the cyclist to make sure that the reporting is accurate, and you can get a report changed. So I recommend, if you are in a crash, that you should go to the police station, and it's actually the local police station, if it's a municipal, or you have to go to the nearby state police barracks and actually get a copy of the police report. And then it looks like here that's 57%. The high majority of people do not have a camera what they ride with, yet 30% are thinking about it. So there are tons of options out there that are sub $100 that you could get, which might in the end save you the hassle of trying to deal with the damn insurance companies.
I have a number of cases where either my client was riding with a helmet cam, or the person behind them was and captured what happened, where if we didn't have that footage, they would have been denied any sort of recovery. So it can make a huge difference. Yeah.
Great. So we're just rounding out now. I do want to offer to keep Josh around if he's available for a few minutes to go through some of these Q&As, sure. But I understand that we're up on the hour. Before we go, I want to see if I can share my screen again. I want to thank everybody for sticking around. This was the first of what I say is going to be in our webinar series. I'll go through a few more that are coming up. On this Thursday, we're doing an ABCs of bike maintenance with the Chelmsford Library. And the beauty of having it over Zoom is that you don't actually have to live in Chelmsford to participate in this. So come on by and we'll show you how to do the air brakes and chain. That's on Thursday at noon. It's open to the public, and I'll share these links in the chat and then in a subsequent email. And these are all on Mass Bike's website as well. Next Monday is bike packing the Bay Circuit Trail. So we're trying to do a variety of webinars. It should be an inspirational one next Monday. The Bay Circuit Trail is a 230-mile loop that's kind of like an extra ring outside of 128, but it starts up in, I believe it goes to Lowell, makes its way to Concord, and dips back down all the way into, like Duxbury or somewhere around there. So check out the Bay Circuit Trail. We had 2 riders do it last year. They've documented it. It's mostly mountain biking, but there's some pavement as well. But if you want to get inspired to go do some bike packing, which is a perfect quarantine, socially distanced activity. And then a week after that, we're doing a national conversation about bike advocacy called From DC to Your Block. We're going to have a conversation with folks from the League of American Bicyclists, the East Coast Greenway, and Rails to Trails Conservancy to talk about national policies, funding, local and regional. So stick around for that. So those will all be on the links, and we encourage you. These are all free and open to the public. We've had to up our Zoom account because we got too many RSVPs here, so we are up to 500 participants if we need to. So I'm proud to say that we are representing all across the state too. So thanks. I'd be remiss, my board members who are listening, if I didn't mention that we're also a member-driven organization. So we encourage you to donate to Mass Bike. We're also giving away these nifty buffs. That if you donate $100 or more, we're just going to throw a buff in the mail for you. Or if you just want a buff, give me an email and just say nice things. We all want to make sure that you're covered out there. One question we did get, which I don't know if Josh, you're equipped to answer, is like, do cyclists need to follow the governor's mask orders? Answer is yes. Just follow what the governor's saying about COVID out there, guys. Just follow the governor and the CDC. They're your main. Don't listen to Facebook. If the governor says masks, wear a mask. But Mass Bike Buff is perfect. So you can go to our donate page. Anybody $100 or more would be great. And I think that might be all. I'll stop sharing my screen. I want to thank you all for attending. And it's just after 1 o'clock. We're going to record this well, we are recording this. We're going to process this and put it on our YouTube channel to send your way shortly. But Josh, for as long as you're able to stick around for 5 or 10 more minutes,
Yeah, totally.
we can just keep on kicking it. And I want to thank everybody. We had up to 85 participants. We're down to like 70 right now, so a lot of you are still sticking around. But thanks so much, and I hope you got a lot out of this webinar.
Yeah. I'd love to answer some more of these questions. These are some interesting questions here.
I'll keep you up. Let's do it.
Yeah, awesome. So Steve Pastel rides a hand cycle, which is cool, which makes hand signals difficult. And he has a Lumos helmet with built-in turn signals, also very cool. If I am using electric turn signals, legally, do I still need to hand signal? How about a normal cycle using electric signals? Do they still need to hand signal? Well, good question. And back in, that's one of the areas that was improved back in 2009 by Mass Bike's efforts. Basically, you know, hand signals used to be mandatory. And then they changed not only what the signals were, I believe, but also whether or not they're mandatory. So hand signals in Massachusetts are mandatory unless doing so would be unsafe. And so when you think about it, you know, asking people to take a hand off of their handlebars before they make a turn is potentially very unsafe, because, you know, being able to operate in a straight line or maintain control of a bike requires both hands on the handlebars to counteract each other. Also, you're removing one hand from, unless you have a coaster brake, one of the ways of stopping your bike. So, you know, it's like if turning on your turn signal in your car required you to pick your feet up off the floor and operate it with your foot. And so Mass Bike, you know, got that law passed. Now, the other thing they did was hand signals used to only be acceptable if they were done by the left hand, because the initial, you know, hand signals for cars could only be done with the left hand. So, you know, taking a right turn, let's see, left turn, slowing down, because you can't reach your hand out the other side of the other car window. And so that was just applied to bikes. And so in a lot of states, and I think it includes Massachusetts, hand signals had to be done by your left hand. So you can't just point with your right hand if you're making a right turn, point with your left hand. And that is, in my opinion, the best way to do hand signals, because it is intuitive and it makes sense. This could be that you're waving to someone, and it just confuses drivers. You used to need to learn hand signals for your driver's test. Most drivers don't know them, and it really, you know, it's an antiquated holdover. So to answer your question, you don't need to do hand signals in any circumstance if it would be unsafe. But I think that the electric turn signals is a great idea, and it shouldn't be an issue in Massachusetts.
But it's not codified. I mean, technically, hand signals are what put in the law. So blinking turn signals are not actually in the statute. That could be something that we could work on. So very good question there, because we are seeing new technology. I know that scooters, for instance, might actually, they're reworking what a scooter is, quote unquote, because Vespas are different from the little Lime scooters. And there's talk about requiring turn signals on some of those, as they are currently. So there might be opening for conversation.
And that's the instability on one of those like Bird or Lime scooters, when you take one hand off the handlebars, is very severe. Like, so if you're going to be hand signaling on one of those, it's even more dangerous, because they have the tiny wheels, and you have to have both hands on the handlebars on those. So
can I jump into one if you know it, if you know about permits?
Yeah, go for it.
So one question is about a group rides, because I know we got a lot of group ride fans or represent riding clubs out there. So can a police restrict a group from riding through a town, assuming that they're following the laws of stopping and stoplights and riding two abreast and all that? And does a bike club need to get permission from every town that an event, but not a race, passes through? And that might be more on a municipal level and not.
I mean, that first question, the answer is hell no. Screw that. You know, like,
So,
and they've certainly tried. We've dealt with this. Geez, I think I've had to deal with this twice. Once, first for Boston Bike Party, when we first started doing that, and I think 2013 or 2012, the Boston police wanted to say that we couldn't do that, and it's like, well, you know, it's not a parade. It's just a bunch of people riding bikes on the road. So that's like saying that you can't drive a car on the road. If you're going to shut down the road, you can shut down the road to everybody. But shutting down a road to specifically cyclists who, as the Massachusetts legislature had made clear, have a full right to the road, you know, with the exception of highways, it's not something that the Boston police can do. And then after the Boston Marathon bombing, because we had just the night before secured the participation of the MBTA, and they gave us a train and to take us out to the starting line. It was really cool.
It was for the midnight marathon bike ride. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was the next year. It was the year after that that they tried to say, hey, you know, can you guys not do this? We don't want to have to get the police involved. And it's like, well, you can't get first of all, do you really want terrorists to win? You know, we're doing this. We've been doing this for years. Yeah. But really, it was like, you know, what are the police going to do? Tell people they can't ride bikes on the road? I mean, the road that has no drivers on it, it's not a great look. So yeah, if you're planning a group ride, as long as you're not stopping, you know, the roads are made to be traveled on. So that unless you're obstructing traffic or you know, stopping and, you know, having a picnic or something, it shouldn't be an issue.
Cool. That's good to know. We still have like lots of questions. I'm happy to keep you as long as you want.
Yeah, I do have to go here in about, I'd say like another 10 minutes.
Okay.
But yeah, let's keep going.
I like this. Let's see. Boston now has new bike lanes. Sorry, I'm just gonna jump in if you don't mind me moderating.
Yeah, go for it.
Paul. So this is about infrastructure, which actually I'm very curious about too. Boston has new bike lanes right next to sidewalks. There's several close calls with pedestrians suddenly walking into the bike lane. I'm imagining these are the curb separated ones, separate from the travel lanes. So yeah, as I understand it, from Mass Bike's point of view, there is no legal stipulation about differentiation between a travel lane for an auto vehicle and a travel lane for a bicyclist. But what do you know, Josh?
Well, wait, no. So what's the? The
question is, I suppose I'm throwing two questions into one, but this one is about pedestrians suddenly walking into the bike lane without looking or giving indication. Who would be at fault there?
If someone steps off of the curb into traffic.
Yeah, assuming it's in a curb separated. So imagine Comm Ave now that we've gotten this curb separated. So it's sidewalk is the same level as the bike lane. Some pedestrian ambles into the bike lane and is struck. Is there going to be a designation of fault there? Because I imagine if you're riding on the sidewalk proper and you hit a pedestrian, the cyclist would be at fault there.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, almost certainly. So the very good question. I've handled actually a couple of cases like this, but really it comes down to if there's an intersection involved. So if this pedestrian is stepping into the bike lane, but you have a red light and it's the bike lane leading up to an intersection, well, that's a little different. But if it's just in the middle of a stretch of road and this person is crossing the road steps into the road without looking, I would say that person is negligent and would be at fault. But again, it's tricky because, well, yeah, I mean, it's hard. The situations I've seen was a cyclist riding through a red light, and it was someone in a crosswalk. But if someone steps off of a curb into a bike lane, I would say that rests pretty squarely with the pedestrian, which I guess is good news. But what I see as bad news is the fact that we're probably seeing that a lot more, because everyone's wearing headphones and, not paying attention. So yeah, I have a really loud bell, and I keep a lookout for pedestrians. But yeah, it's a problem, but I wouldn't worry about being sued.
Cool. I'll let you go ahead and pick.
Oh yeah.
While you're choosing, I'm just going to make a comment from John Taylor. He says, in all fairness to us bicyclists, we sometimes do dumb things. So yeah, let's be safe out there, I think is his tagline at the end of that comment. Just
yeah, totally.
Yeah,
I mean, this is the bike community is, I mean, this is a political movement, if you think about it, and we're agitating for change, and we're trying to get better infrastructure, better laws, and we're pitching ourselves as members of the community here. So anytime that any of us does anything bad, it reflects poorly on all of us, and I know that sucks, but really this is a political movement, and that's important. Pedal reflectors. What about SPD pedals? Where do you even put the reflectors? A good question. I have some pedals on my bike that I think I cut up a reflective sticker and just put it on the back of them. But that's because I'm a lawyer, and I represent cyclists, and I know that that's the law, and I just want to make sure that I'm covered. I mean, I would say just wait, SPD, those are like clip-in or clipless, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would add reflective stickers to the heels of your shoes if you can, and that'll cover you. But again, it's not anything that I've ever had pointed out to me by an insurance company. No cop will ever pull you over for it, because cops don't know even the more important bike laws, so they're not going to know the minutia. So yeah.
Yeah. I also want to say that ankle reflectors, I think, do count. So you can have a reflective band around your ankle.
Oh yeah, that's.
And again, this is
mentioned in the law.
Yeah, and that is in the law too. I understand that this is a lot about insurance claims and at fault and all that, but the real purpose of these laws is to avoid crashes and be safe. So the point of reflectors is not to say I'm complying with the law, although that is the point of this webinar. But the point of reflectors is to say, hey, don't hit me with your vehicle. You see me. So that's ideally to even avoid the crash.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about is sort of, there are two sides of it. One is before a crash and one is after a crash, and the rules change a lot. And so because of my line of work, I'm very focused on what happens after a crash and what could have been done before a crash, not so much to prevent it, but to, prepare for that eventuality. Can you get type of underinsurance coverage if you don't own a car and don't have an existing auto insurance policy? It's tricky. I think that like Velosurance might have some, but it's not great. I remember when they started out, they contacted me and I had some questions about it. But I think it's like capped at like $35,000 or something. And again, it sounds like a lot of money, but it doesn't sound like so much money when you have 2 broken wrists or a broken leg and you can't work for 6 months. I mean, anyway. But yeah, let's see. Yeah, and I haven't found an auto insurance company that would write a policy if you don't own a car. They just get confused.
Yeah. I got a question that's pumped up. That's a really good one that I like. While a bike can pass a car on the right, especially at a stop place, can a bike pass another bike? I guess a biker can pass another biker on the right. Yeah. Is there assigned fault there, or?
Well, it would have to, it would be hard to say. That would assume that something happened, right? That a crash occurred as a result of that. Right. I don't know. I mean, I would have to see the actual scenario, but under the current laws, a bike can pass a bike on the right. The only people who can't pass on the right are motorists. So, yeah.
Good. Thanks.
Oh, let's see here.
This is great. I appreciate everybody peppering us with questions. There's a lot of nuances out there you can see.
To answer M. Savitz, your underinsured motorist coverage kicks in when you are a pedestrian or cyclist, i.e. not an auto driver or passenger. The answer is yes. It covers you as long as you're injured by a car. So, yeah, no type of insurance for cyclists who don't own a car can protect themselves, unfortunately. I mean, health insurance. You can also, if someone you live with has a auto insurance policy, or a parent, or spouse, you can get yourself listed on their policy, or potentially if it's what's known as a household policy, covers all members of a household, and that's defined differently between different insurance companies. I've gone back and forth with a number of insurance companies. Some of them accept it if you live in the same household, get mail there, whatever. Some of them say that you have to be married or related to the person. So it's tricky. Any recourse for drivers who are aggressive, laying on the horn, passing very close, cutting cyclists off, shouting curses, etc., without a crash occurring? The answer is no, and it sucks. I would like to see something happen with that, and it's sort of outside of my general realm of expertise, because it really, if property wasn't damaged and if injury didn't occur, there's nothing that you can do, really. I mean, I guess potentially assault in the civil sense, where you like punch at someone but stop before you hit them. That is technically a tort. But yeah, I mean, it's something that happens all the time. It happens to me. I think it happens to almost everybody who rides a bike in the city. So yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah. So harassment is not illegal?
No, I mean, if it's the same person doing it every day, that could be a number of different other crimes. But just laying on your horn and yelling at a cyclist, police departments, and I get contacted by people who get just fucked with by drivers.
Yeah.
There's nothing that they can really do, at least here. I mean, a law could certainly be written, but we don't have one. Oh,
one
yeah.
or two more?
This person, RE, makes note that a caution about license plates: this does not show who drove the car, only the owner. The owner cannot be held responsible for the action of the motor vehicle when they are not driving it. Confirm the identity of the driver if possible. Very true. However, when it comes to remembering two things after you just got hit by a car, the most important thing is still the license plate. And the other thing is, the license plate is linked to the insurance, and we don't really, when it comes to civil liability, I don't give a shit if the owner is driving or not. As long as we can prove what happened, that whoever was driving this car was being negligent. That's for the owner and their cousin who was driving to sort out. I don't care. The auto insurance company also doesn't really care, unless it's a rented car, in which case, and I've dealt with this before, you have to have a named driver on so when you rent a car, it has to be operated by whoever the rental car company has designated on the insurance. And if your buddy who is helping you move or whatever drives the rental car and his name is not on the rental agreement, then the insurance doesn't apply to them. But in pretty much any other scenario, it doesn't matter who is driving, unless it's a criminal situation.
Well, I want to jump in real quick. Eileen asked about vulnerable user, a road user law. Just to update where MassBike is on that. So the vulnerable road user laws we've written in Massachusetts would It's basically the same as a 3-foot passing law, but it's not just for cyclists, it's also for pedestrians, stadies, writing tickets, tow truck drivers, anybody who's out next to traffic. And it's basically at 30 miles an hour would be a passing distance of 3 feet, 40 miles an hour, 4 feet, 50 miles, 50 feet, exactly, or et cetera. And it made its way through the Senate unanimously, this bill, which was put up by Senator Brownsberger, and was a very similar bill, was put out, almost exactly the same bill was put up by Rep. Moran and Rep. Strauss in the House. Rep. Moran is way high in the leadership, and Rep. Strauss is the chair of the Transportation Committee. So we were very hopeful that this session we were going to be able to get this bill passed. However, it's sitting in Ways and Means currently. It's made its way out of the Transportation Committee, no problem. Sitting in Ways and Means currently. All bills are kind of stalled if they're not immediately COVID related. So we were hopeful that we were going to get it out this session, but it may end up being next session or future sessions. But we've basically recognized that the Senate unanimously supports this, and we've got leadership in the House who's pushing it. So we think we can get vulnerable users out there. It's not going to be quite the same as what people know from the Netherlands, which is more of a at fault conversation. So it's the driver or the person who is operating the more dangerous level, whether it's from truck to car to bike to moped or whatever. The impetus of proving the burden of fault is on those who are most dangerous. It's not going to be that necessarily. We don't have the same legal principles as they have out in Eastern Europe. But what we're looking at is basically the safe passing, which for the most part is what people are facing out there. And again, it's not just for cyclists. This is roped into what they call the bike bill, but there's really not much about bikes in particular. It's really about, we call it an act to reduce traffic fatalities is what we're calling this one. So happy to update you a little bit more on that, but currently, unfortunately, we've been checking with our state reps and senators pretty regularly, but if it's not immediate towards healthcare, nursing homes, or unemployment conversations, it's on the back burner.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, but I'm glad to hear things are moving forward with that. That's great.
Slowly but surely.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I guess I have time for one more.
One more.
Yeah, at 1:30 here.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for sticking around too. This has been really encouraging for MassBike to know that the webinars are going to be a hit, and tell your friends to come to the next one.
Let's see here. In what way might video footage be useful? Some of my friends are mounting rear and front facing cameras specifically to record incidents. I mean, it can tell, it's a unbiased observer. Video footage can just, counteract whatever the driver said, whatever a witness had to say that may not be helpful. It's enormously helpful and extremely credible, almost too credible in a lot of situations. And there are obviously scenarios where video doesn't capture everything that happened or may look like something else. But yeah, I mean, their bike mounted video is extremely helpful, as is surveillance video from buildings, at the intersection or nearby that couldn't show. There was one case where I had surveillance video of a piece of the road leading up to an intersection, but didn't actually capture the crash itself. But it showed that the driver was in the left lane. They said to the police that they were in the right lane. They, that would have changed everything if they were in the right lane. They wouldn't have been at fault, and yet we have video showing them in the left lane, even though it didn't show the crash itself. So there are a lot of different ways, but I mean, there's nothing better than getting video of how a crash occurred. Yeah. Oh yeah, this one. Maureen Conway. When cyclists are found at fault, is that a surchargeable event, assuming they have a car with insurance? The answer is no, because their insurance, a cyclist's auto insurance is not really active in that way while you're out riding. So a surchargeable event would have to be if you're operating the named vehicle on the policy. So nothing to worry about there. I've had situations where, I mean, I think that the worst that would happen would be that the auto insurance company wants you to reimburse them for what they paid the body shop or the mechanic to do to fix the car. So they come after you for that, saying that it's your fault. And I've helped out a few people where, you know, they're getting a letter, an angry letter from Geico or whatever, saying that they owe, you know, $8,000 to repair this guy's door or whatever it is. And, you know, in those cases, they usually back off once they know that someone is represented by a lawyer. So we take those cases pro bono and generally try and help people get rid of these debts, these phony debts for damaging someone's car with your face or whatever it is.
Great. Well, cool, Josh.
Cool.
I want to encourage us to wrap it up. I want to thank everyone for sticking around. Check out Bike Safe Boston. That's how you can find Josh and his work. We'll send out a link once this is posted, some answers to some questions that we didn't quite get to yet. And I think we're getting to most of them. And actually, we can even type the answers here if you want. But I'll save the Q&A. So if you feel free to type some answers in here, Josh, we can save them and send them to everybody. And Josh is just one of the lawyers out there. He's a great one in the Boston area. But if you're statewide, or if you want to check out some you know, supporters of bike advocacy around, keep in touch with Mass Bike. It's super important that if you are in an incident that you get representation. And I should also probably preface this by saying, Josh, you may not be anybody's lawyer here, so all of this is advice. But yeah, take it as you will.
Totally.
Also to throw in here, Josh, to close it up.
No, but you know, I'd be happy. I'd love to do this again. I think that, you know, there's a lot more that we could cover, and if there's interest, I'd be happy to hop on another one of these. This is really cool.
Awesome. Well, I'm really grateful to have you, your talent, your support. So thanks so much, man.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Galen. Take care.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye.